Ladies and gentlemen, relinquish. In every human being there exists something far deeper than the personality we often identify with. The personality is made of roles, labels, and stories. But presence is the living essence that animates us. Relinquish. To allow the presence to shine through the person means stepping beyond the limitations of the ego. Beyond the masks we wear for the world. Relinquish. And reconnecting with the stillness and awareness that is at the core of who we truly are. Relinquish. Presence is not something we have to create. It is already there. Silently waiting beneath our constant thoughts and worries. Relinquish. When we rest in presence, we radiate authenticity. People sense a natural peace, a groundedness, a clarity that does not come from pretending or performing. Relinquish. A person rooted in presence does not need to seek validation, because their being itself speaks louder than any words or achievements. The challenge is that the mind resists stillness. Relinquish. It clings to identities, our name, our job, our status, our history. But when we stop over identifying with those layers, we open a doorway for something timeless to emerge. This does not mean we discard our personality, relinquish, but rather that the personality becomes a transparent vessel through which presence flows. Relinquish. Instead of being dominated by thought, we become guided by awareness. Allowing presence to shine through the person transforms relationships. Instead of reacting with defensiveness or judgment, we respond with compassion and understanding. Instead of competing, we connect. Instead of living in fear, we rest in trust. Others can feel it. They sense the light behind the words, the silence behind the actions. Ultimately, this is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming fully aligned with what we already are. The more we allow presence to shine through, the more the world around us reflects peace, harmony, and truth. It begins not by adding anything, by allowing the light of awareness to naturally express itself through the form we call person. The distinction between personas, when Motivational is a personality, the most important understanding someone can have their journey towards self-awareness, towards peace, and toward self-awareness. Personality is what most people believe themselves to be. It is a collection of names, labels, roles, and characteristics that society relinquish. Family and personal history have layered upon us. Relinquish. It is how we present ourselves to the outside world and how we often measure our worth. When by achievements, opinions, and the image we maintain, relinquish. But beneath this surface identity lies something much deeper, something that is not created by thought or shaped by circumstance, that is presence. Presence is the timeless awareness that observes without judgment, the silent witness that is there before any thought arises and after every thought fades away, Unlike personality, it does not need to be defended, improved, or validated, because it already is complete and whole. When people confuse their personality with their true essence, they become trapped in limitations, relinquish. They start believing that they are nothing more than their past, their profession, their failures or their successes. This creates stress, anxiety, and the endless need to protect an image that is fragile and temporary. Presence, on the other hand, is unshakable. It cannot be diminished by failure, nor inflated by success. It is the source of peace that remains constant, relinquish. No matter how the outer circumstances shift, relinquish. When we allow presence to shine through the person, relinquish. The personality no longer becomes a prison, but a vehicle, It is not erased, but transformed, becoming an expression of something deeper and more real, When the distinction between the two helps us live with clarity, knowing that who we are is not limited to the form the world sees, but rooted in the formless awareness that flows through every moment. Presence is the true essence of who we are, relinquish. The living awareness that exists before the mind creates labels and stories, relinquish. It is not something that can be achieved or acquired through effort because it is already within us, relinquish. Silently present beneath the constant noise of thought, Presence reveals itself in moments of stillness, relinquish. When we are not lost in past regrets or future anxieties, relinquish. But simply aware of the now. It is the unchanging ground of our being, The same presence that we experienced as children when we looked at the world with freshness and wonder before the mind became cluttered with concepts and judgments, Unlike the personality, which is shaped by time and circumstance, when presence is timeless and untouched by external conditions. When we begin to recognize presence as our true essence, life takes on a different quality. Instead of being defined by roles, possessions, or the opinions of others, we feel anchored in something deeper, Presence allows us to experience life directly without the constant filter of thought, A simple walk, a conversation, or even a moment of silence becomes filled with richness because we are truly there, relinquish. This recognition frees us from the compulsion to constantly prove ourselves or chase external validation, relinquish. Because the awareness itself is already whole, relinquish. Presence is not about withdrawal from life, but about living more fully, quish, with greater sensitivity and clarity, quish. It allows us to embrace both joy and pain without being overwhelmed, relinquish, because at the core, we know that awareness is untouched, to relinquish. This shift from identifying only with the personality to realizing in presence as the essence of who we are is what brings peace, quish, depth and meaning to our existence, relinquish, allowing us to move through life with a sense of freedom and authenticity. The ego often acts as the greatest barrier to allowing presence to shine through the person because it thrives on separation. Quish. Identification and constant comparison, quish. The ego is essentially the voice in the mind that says, I am this, or I am not that, always trying to define itself through external attachments, quish. When it clings to names, roles, possessions, opinions, and past experiences, relinquish, making us believe that our worth and identity depend on these temporary forms, quish. While the ego can give a sense of individuality, quish, it also creates conflict and suffering because it is never satisfied, quish. It constantly seeks validation, fears loss, and measures its value against others, relinquish. In this restless state, presence is overshadowed, relinquish, and the deeper awareness that lies beyond the mind cannot be fully expressed through the person. When we live primarily from the ego, relinquish, relationships become strained, quish, because the ego sees others as competitors or threats rather than fellow expressions of the same life, quish. It thrives on control, defensiveness, and judgment, relinquish, all of which block the natural flow of compassion and understanding that arises from presence, quish. The ego also resists stillness because silence exposes its emptiness, relinquish. That is why many people feel uncomfortable with quiet moments, quish. When the ego fears dissolving into presence, so it distracts us with endless thoughts, quish, worries or desires. Yet beneath all this noise, presence patiently waits, quish. It does not fight the ego, but simply shines when given space, relinquish. The more we become aware of the ego's patterns, its need for superiority, quish, its fear of insignificance, quish, its constant demand for attention, the less control it has over us, relinquish. This awareness does not destroy the ego, but places it in its proper place, quish, as a tool rather than a master. By softening the grip of ego, we open the doorway for presence to flow through effortlessly, allowing life to be guided not by fear and separation, but by clarity and wholeness. When presence shines through a person, relinquish. When authenticity naturally arises, because there is no longer a need to wear masks or pretend to be something we are not, when most of the stress and exhaustion people feel comes from constantly trying to live up to images, expectations or roles that do not reflect their true self, relinquish. Presence dissolves this pressure because it is rooted in what is real, relinquish, not in appearances. When a person is grounded in presence, their words, actions, and even silence carry a certain weight and sincerity. Others can sense it, not because of what is said, but because of the energy behind it, This authenticity is not about being perfect or flawless, but about being genuine, transparent, relinquish, and aligned with the truth of the moment, living authentically through presence also transforms how we make choices and face challenges. Instead of reacting from fear or ego-driven motives, relinquish. Decisions come from a deeper clarity and stillness. This gives rise to courage, relinquish, because presence is not concerned with failure or judgment, relinquish. It simply expresses itself through the person without attachment to outcomes, relinquish. Authenticity also creates a sense of freedom because we are no longer bound by the need for approval or recognition. This freedom allows creativity, kindness, and wisdom to flow naturally, relinquish, enriching not only our lives, but also the lives of those around us, relinquish. People are drawn to authenticity because it is rare in a world where so much is driven by appearances and performance. When presence is allowed to guide the personality, authenticity becomes effortless, relinquish, and we begin to radiate a quiet strength that does not come from ego, but from alignment with something greater, This alignment gives life depth, making every interaction, every moment, relinquish, an opportunity to express the truth of who we are. When presence is allowed to flow through a person, relinquish, relationships begin to change in profound ways because presence removes the barriers created by ego, fear, and judgment. In ordinary interactions, relinquish. People often relate through their personalities, relinquish, which are shaped by past experiences, expectations, and insecurities, relinquish. This creates misunderstandings, defensiveness, and emotional distance because each person is more concerned with protecting their image or being right than with truly connecting, relinquish. Presence shifts this dynamic because it brings us into the now, relinquish, where we are able to listen with full attention and respond with clarity rather than react unconsciously, relinquish. In the light of presence, communication becomes deeper, relinquish, not just an exchange of words, but an exchange of energy, sincerity, relinquish, and understanding when two people meet in presence, relinquish. Conflict has less room to grow because presence does not take offense or hold onto grudges, relinquish. It allows compassion to arise naturally because we can sense the shared humanity beneath the surface differences, relinquish. Even in disagreements, relinquish. Presence brings a spaciousness that softens defensiveness and makes space for genuine dialogue, relinquish. Relationships are no longer about using others to fulfill our own needs or validate our self-worth, but about truly seeing and honoring the other person as they are, relinquish. This creates a foundation of trust, openness, relinquish, and peace that cannot be built on ego alone, relinquish. Presence also helps us recognize when to step back, relinquish. When silence is more powerful than words, relinquish. And when patience is more healing than action, whether in family life, friendships, relinquish, or work relationships, relinquish. The quality of presence becomes a gift we bring into every interaction, relinquish. The more we cultivate presence, relinquish, the more our connections transform from shallow exchanges into meaningful encounters that leave both sides enriched and uplifted, relinquish. Reflecting the deeper unity that connects all human beings. When presence is allowed to shine through the person, relinquish. Life itself begins to feel transformed because we no longer experience it only through the narrow lens of ego and thought, relinquish. Instead of constantly reacting to circumstances with fear, worry, or desire, relinquish, we develop the ability to meet each moment with awareness, relinquish. This shift brings a sense of clarity that cuts through confusion, relinquish, because presence is not clouded by the endless stories of the mind, relinquish. It allows us to see situations as they are rather than as our ego interprets them, relinquish, which makes decision-making simpler and more aligned with truth. In this state, relinquish, joy no longer depends on external achievements or possessions, but arises naturally from the peace of simply being aware. Presence also changes the way we experience challenges, relinquish. Life will always bring difficulties, but when rooted in presence, relinquish, we are not overwhelmed by them. We can feel pain without being consumed by it, relinquish. Face setbacks without losing our sense of worth, quish, and navigate uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear, quish. Presence provides a steady ground, quish, a calm center that remains untouched no matter how turbulent the outer world becomes, relinquish. This gives us resilience, patience, relinquish, when the capacity to move through life with grace, quish. It also allows us to appreciate the simple things, a breath, a smile, quish, a moment of silence, because we are no longer rushing past them in search of something better, quish. Living in presence brings harmony because we act consciously rather than unconsciously, relinquish, guided by awareness rather than ego, quish. Life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a flow, quish, where we are no longer pushing against reality, but moving with it, relinquish. This flow creates a deep sense of fulfillment that cannot be found in the pursuit of external success or recognition